Channing, we're so happy you're here to help us learn and teach about grant writing, because we want to help every early career or novice researcher build the career they envision for themselves. So Joe and I want to ask you some questions about how you do grant writing and some tips for success.
Excellent. Well,
Okay.
thank you, Anne and Joe. It's my absolute pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So let's start just with the simplest. If we're talking about grant writing, we also think about writing, just getting words on a page. How do you do it? Do you have any secrets, things that have started to work well for you, or you've changed?
So throughout my entire academic career, they always say, write every day, write every day, write every day. And honestly, I cannot write every day. That's just not how my mind works or how my mind thinks. And so I just try to carve out time to write. So I actually block my calendar all day Friday and don't schedule meetings on Friday. So I have all day Friday to get into the literature and get some thoughts on paper. And I'm kind of a dumper. So I'll just write everything and then go back and have somebody else tell me what's not important to my grant.
That's awesome. So if you have a blocked Friday, isn't that very tempting to do other things? Or do you find sometimes that it's so much time you kind of don't know where to begin?
Yeah, you can definitely go down those literature rabbit holes, but I find it gives me some peace of mind knowing, like, if things are building up through the week, that I have that protected time to try to knock out papers and knock out grants.
You said you like to dump and then ask someone else
Yeah.
what they think. Are there certain people you like to ask, certain kinds of people? Like, what is your strategy for advice?
So I've been very lucky that I've had very good mentors for the most part throughout my career. And so kind of how I was trained was, don't show your mentor a first draft, like a perfect polished, like this is ready for submission draft. Show them just whatever you're thinking and then get some help and guidance to narrow it down and craft it into that fundable grant or that publishable paper.
So you're not worried about showing something that's like, I'm rambling, or you can see that I don't know what I'm trying to say.
It's taken me years to be comfortable with that. But yes, I'm at a point now, and I actually find it really helpful, because then what happens is sometimes my mentor will say, like, this is not good for this grant, but save this language because we can use this language elsewhere. And so you start to develop, some standard, a lot of grant writing is a lot of standard language sometimes. So you have little paragraphs that you can pick and choose from that are already written, which is really helpful.
You must have had a mentor who made you feel safe to do that, because
Yes.
thinking back, there would definitely be mentors I would not feel good about doing that, but how helpful.
Yeah, my mentor always says, if you're stuck, we're all stuck. So don't be stuck.
That is some wisdom.
Yeah.
That is some good wisdom.
So tell us about your most recent grant.
The most recent funded one?
Most recent funded.
So I'm very, very lucky. My very first grant as a PI, as a PhD level researcher, was a very prestigious award through Cambia Health Foundation, where they fund early career scholars who are interested in end-of-life care research. And so I got to do, with this award, I got to do my dream study. Just finished data collecting, so I'm very excited to see what the data is going to look like. And a foundation award is a really good award for early career investigators, because it doesn't have all the rules and regulations of an NIH grant. You just kind of get the money to do the work.
Mm-hmm. So it was an early career scientist development award or something.
Yeah,
sort
you
of
have to be pre-K to be eligible.
So it's, if we explain what a pre-K is, if K is the NIH word for Career Development Award, a mentored research grant, and that's the big 5-year grant. That's the dream study that's going to give you time to prepare to be an independent researcher. Pre-K means it's something smaller before you get this big 5-year grant, because then they think you're good, right? So tell me more about, since you're a PhD, I'm a PhD, it's always been part of my life that we have to write grants to foundations and federal funders, because there is no, perfect funding source for what we study. Can you talk about some of the advantages and how you target foundations to do that.
Yeah, foundations are great because usually they have a niche that they're really passionate about and want to fund. So it's almost low-hanging fruit in a way to get money from a foundation if you're really passionate about heart disease, or in my case, end-of-life care, because they really want to fund that type of work.
And so you got to find one that cares about what you care about, right?
Yeah. And once you're in a space, you should know who those foundations are. Once you're in cardiology or end-of-life care or emergency medicine or whatever it is, find out who your foundations are.
And how do you do that?
One way is to, if you're able to, attend professional conferences, because all professional conferences have what they call exhibit rooms where people have booths, and almost all foundations will have booths at these exhibit rooms, so you can meet people and get information and figure out what kind of things they're funding and when they're funding. So that's something I highly recommend. And then talk to your mentors. Most of our senior mentors have been around for a minute, and they know what foundations are out there and which foundations are willing to fund early stage investigators.
That's a great idea, because obviously there are many conferences that cover topical areas of interest, so you're likely to find funders who fund that kind of work. And then that's also how you would meet investigators in that area as well, especially if you're in a smaller institution and there aren't 10 people down the hall who do this kind of work.
Yeah.
Is that what you do? You just kind of visit sessions and try to meet people?
And you got to present. So one thing that I will say that I've learned in the work that I do, most investigators are really invested in bringing up early stage investigators. And so you go to these conferences and you don't want to talk to these people because you've read every single paper that they've written and they're up on this pedestal, and then you meet them and they're like the coolest people ever. Most recently, I was at a conference where I presented, and this gentleman walked up to me and starts asking me about my poster and the measures that I use, the surveys that I use. I start explaining the surveys to him, and then I stop and say, "What's your name?" And I look at his name, and it was the guy who invented the survey.
Nice.
And so I felt like a fool because I'm standing there explaining to him his own survey. But he was so excited that somebody was actually using it. And then I've made this connection with this really prominent person in the field who's very invested in my research. Like, he wants to stay in contact and he wants to see what I'm publishing.
Yes. I mean, you're completely taking me back, way back to when I was a graduate student, and we were required to present at a regional conference.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, well, what am I supposed to present? I don't even have a study. But, well, I have the makings of a study, so present that. I'll never forget, we were in a session, there were a number of novice researchers, and these lovely senior people were in there asking us questions, trying to help everybody. It was really quite supportive. I only have positive memories of those times.
Yeah.
So when you're saying present, I've never done this before.
Yeah.
So are you talking about like you're actually presenting in front of an audience, or is it like more of you have a poster up and some people are walking around? What does that look like?
It could be both.
Okay.
So what you're talking about, they call them or podium presentations, where you're standing in a podium and you get 10 or 15 minutes to talk about your research. And it's,
The PowerPoint
Yeah,
thing.
the PowerPoint thing. And it's, background, study design, results, conclusions in that format.
Okay.
And then the posters are really great too, because it has all of that information on it, but it's way more interactive because people are walking by and talking to you.
So since you've done this before and you've been successful, are there any tips or tricks when it comes to just presenting?
Make sure that if you're doing a podium talk, make sure that you practice. You think that you know what you're going to say, but it's a high pressure situation because you're in front of a room which can have hundreds of people at a podium. So you want to practice and make sure that your talk is really down well. And make sure somebody proofreads your slides.
Let's talk a little bit more about practicing, because some people practicing means I'm just speaking in my head.
No.
Some people it means you're going to talk to the mirror. I think you mean get in front of people who are not you and literally run your show one time through, have somebody time keep, let them quiz you, remake, go again.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, it's like the real deal.
Yeah, we all do that thing where we're practicing it in our heads, and that's just not enough. You really need to practice your full talk in front of people.
Actually, I will tell you a funny story. We had a scientific council meeting for a research center I'm part of, and all the senior faculty were assigned to help prep the junior faculty who had been picked to present. And the guy I got paired up with is like a 40-year-old associate professor, like a highly competent researcher. But that's what we were doing. And so I was like, hey, I hope you don't mind. Like, we're practicing together. And it actually was so fun. It was so collaborative. And he was in English as a second language. So we had to be careful about some things. He had to slow way down. And he's a basic scientist. We got like really specific really fast. And I was able to like bring it back. Like you're talking to people who don't know. And when I watched him present, I was so proud. He did really a nice job, but not that I was just a listening partner. But anybody, it doesn't matter what their background, their scientific background is, can help you prep.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if the person you're prepping with doesn't understand it, then there's going to be somebody in that room that doesn't understand it too. Right. And another really valuable lesson that I've learned too, along those lines of you don't have to give a perfect draft to your mentor, is you can recycle a talk, which feels weird to me at first, but it's actually pretty helpful. Like, you have the bones of this talk, and then you can just add new slides when you get new data, but like the background isn't going to change. So you can become an expert. What I've come to be is an expert in the talk that I give. And so I give it at different places, different, for classrooms, for teaching didactics for our students and our fellows, and then at conferences. And it just kind of cuts down on the work, and you kind of become skilled, and it boosts your confidence to be the expert in that area that you're talking.
Yeah, that's great advice. Now, just to follow up what Joe was asking, when you're going to go to one of these conferences to find your funders, to find your peers, you're just applying. Like, you're submitting an abstract to present, and they'll tell you whether it's a poster or a podium, so to speak, right? So I used to say, I won't go to a conference unless I'm presenting. Like, that was one of my accountability rules for myself, because you get so much more out of it when you do the work to bring something forward you're working on. Do you do anything like that?
That's interesting, because I actually got the opposite advice. Really? Is that you shouldn't, like, you definitely absolutely need to present at conferences, but sometimes you should go just to absorb yourself in the science and to absorb yourself in all of the networking. Because oftentimes, like, those presentations overlap with the networking, and sometimes, especially when you're an early investigator, that networking is critical. Because part of what you need to do is we need to build up our own network. So I'm always thinking, who am I going to write my R with? Who's going to, support me on this manuscript? So you're always thinking that next grant. Who's going to help me with that next grant?
Speaking of that next grant, have you noticed any similarities or differences between the type of team you choose when you're a PI or you're invited onto a grant? What do you look for in a research team when it comes to writing a grant?
So I was told very early on in my career to pick 3 things that you're about. And so for me, that's gerontology, health equity, and shared decision making. So I only tried to find projects and people who are passionate about those 3 things.
All 3 are at one
thing. Yeah, at least one, depending on what the project is. Like, in my hospice work, I need somebody who's passionate about older adults and shared decision making. And so when you find those people who have that common goal and that common passion, it's been my experience, and I'm early in my career, that things just move together, just come together very well and very nice, because you have that common interest and that common goal, and we're all passionate about what we do.
So thinking back to grants you've been on before, you talk about passion. Is there any other quality that you look for when it comes to choosing a team or accepting a role, even if it may not be a big part of it, but you want to be able to trust the people you work with?
Yeah, you got to kind of look at the track record of the PI too, and talk to people who have worked with that PI, because some PIs are very, very hands-on, and some PIs are very, very hands-off, and there are pros and cons to both of those scenarios, so you have to figure out what's right for you. Personally, I like a pretty hands-off PI when I'm doing, or a principal investigator, sorry. The principal investigator is the person who's actually responsible for the award. And so they usually aren't doing the day-to-day things to make sure, like the recruiting and all of that stuff. So I prefer to work with a PI that's a little bit hands-off and kind of lets me do my thing. But you might like somebody who's kind of in there, kind of helping guide you along. So it's really kind of a personal preference issue.
The other thing we do when we're advising early career researchers, if they're contemplating a number of senior people who might be a senior mentor or a collaborator, is we look up their publication record. Mm-hmm. And what we say is, if that person is always senior author or always first author, that is a red flag that person is not going to share credit. Right. And that is not a good look. And so unless there's always somebody who's a close second, we would move with real caution for a person like that, or just know what you're getting into. Because at some point, you have to show independent thought to get your own independent grant. And if that person is blocking you on your publications, it will be that harder to do.
Yeah, which means me as an early stage person, I need to be first author or senior, but really first author.
Okay.
Meaning last, first or last.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's like the secret. That's the secret communication in authorship order, and it does. I will tell you, it does really differ by field, because I came up in social sciences where it's first and then descending order. And I honestly, for years being at the medical school, I could not bring myself to go last. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. And I look back and I was like, well, I was senior, but I was second, but I just couldn't accept the cultural norms of this field until later. I was like, what am I doing? Yeah. This is how it is. I need to be senior. Fine. But I couldn't, it was just so ingrained from my training.
Yeah.
It's like last. Why would I go last?
Yeah. It's different. It's definitely different in disciplines. I know in nursing, the senior position is second.
Yeah, right. You need to know that those are the cultural norms of your field, and you choose those carefully. So can I bring us back to the conference? Because you brought up, we debated whether presenting is a must do, a need to do, or a nice to have. The other thing that I would make myself do is I would not go, would I cancel my ticket? I don't know. But in my mind, the requirement was I had to present. I had to make a one-on-one meeting with a potential mentor, a potential funding representative, some VIP, somebody fabulous and important, not in my institution. I would reach out to them in advance. You're going to be there. I'm going to be there. Could we meet for coffee? So I knew if I bungled my way through the whole conference, I would leave with one really successful meeting. And then there was something else that I used to make myself do, but I can't think of what it is. But those two things were my requirements, because sometimes, networking, I really like people. I like you people. But I always feel a little shy in big expos, big mixers. I always struggle to just go walk up to some strange person. I always needed a wing person who was comfortable doing that, but I would rather be in small settings. So that, for me, planning ahead and making a few meetings that I could count on made me feel like that conference is a success, no matter who I bump into.
Right. I also would encourage people, if you're sitting in one of those sessions and you love what a presenter said, go talk to them after the talk, because and to your point, then you can schedule a coffee with them or something and talk deeper and further about the research.
Yes.
And it feels overwhelming sometimes, but I found that people really want to talk about their work and they're flattered that somebody cares.
Exactly.
It's like, you go to a conference and be like, I've read every paper you've written, and they're just excited somebody's reading their work.
You're right. I do remember conferences in those early career days are so critical. And I always started out, I mean, there'll be all kinds of conferences you could go to. I would always look for the smaller, highly specialized conference. When I came out of my postdoc doing mental health services research, and the National Institute for Mental Health used to have a health services research conference, and there were maybe 50, 100 people for 2 days at NIH. And it was like every big name in the area. I loved it so much. And I met so many critical people. And then after 5 years of going to the same conference with the same people, I'm like, why are we're all presenting the same work to the same crowd. Okay, I don't need to be here every year anymore.
Right.
And so as you get more established, you don't need that as much. But early years, that is so, so important.
You just reminded me too, Anne, another tremendously important thing that I recommend too is most conferences have pre-conference workshops. So like the day before the conference actually starts, they'll have half day or whole day trainings in a specific area. And so those are tremendously helpful because a lot of times they have stuff for early career investigators like grant writing or how to publish or how to pick a journal to publish. And those are smaller settings with smaller people or smaller groups of people. But also the faculty who teach those pre-conferences are usually prominent people in the field. So you get a mix of meeting some prominent people, but also meeting some people, some peers.
Yes, that's a great idea. And then you find people who are doing what you're trying to do.
Right.
And they can be peers, even if you don't do the same kind of research. It's funny that you bring this up because actually when I think back, there were a number of people like that at these NIMH conferences I went to. We were kind of postdocs-ish at the same time. And I kept in touch with them over the years, and literally some of them promoted faster than I did. So I gave their names as letter writers for my promotions. And I was thinking back like, oh, this guy I met when I was like 25 years old, and we were both just postdocs, and he could say, I've known Dr. Libby for 20 years and helped me get promoted. So, everybody grows up.
And those are little things that you don't think about when you're an early career investigator, is that you need to think about your next step of your career and getting yourself there with those letters. Like that's something I've never thought about until recently, that I need to start building up that network for people who are going to support me for promotion and tenure.
Yes.
Because you need outside letters. You need letters from people outside your institution.
How many?
I think it depends on...
We ask for 5.
Yeah, your institution.
3 is the bare minimum, but 5 is better. More is better because those letters are your peer review of you. And so it carries great weight in your promotion review. And so for people who've trained locally, then they stayed at the same institution, like the conferences are your link to non-hometown people. You need them. And you have to cultivate a relationship with them. And conferences can help you do that. Yeah, that's great. Okay, can we get back to writing? Because I want to build on the conference conversation. So many mentors recommend that, again, you hold yourself accountable by making some rules, like when I come home and I have a poster presentation, I will not go to the next conference unless I've written that poster up and submitted it to a journal for publication.
Oh, wow.
And, and at least submit it. It might not be accepted, but it is your job to get that thing turned into a peer-reviewed manuscript. So that's not even the harshest rule. One of our former mentees has a different rule, and the rule is you have to have the manuscript drafted by the time you attend the talk to present the poster. Wow, that's pretty hardcore.
Yeah, it is.
This one person in particular would present the poster, get the feedback from people, go up to the hotel room, incorporate the feedback, and then submit. That's some good stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's hardcore, but in some ways I actually kind of do like it, because one thing I've noticed about being faculty is I'm so much more busy than I was as a research assistant. So my days get filled up with all of these meetings, which takes away from my writing time. And so I can see how if there's an expectation that if I'm doing a poster that I also have to have a manuscript ready to submit, will help with productivity. Because as academics, we are required to publish. I think my division, the standard is 4 publications a year. That's different per division. So again, that's why like my Friday writings are really important, because you need to keep that productivity up.
Yes. And I want to build on that, not only to get promoted, but to get a grant.
Yes.
The shorthand way to show that you're an expert on any topic in the world is to have a peer-reviewed publication with your keywords. Ideally, you're first or senior, and even better, your co-authors are the mentors or the team members you're going to bring onto that paper. That one citation tells so much to your reviewer that you can function as a team, you can accomplish a goal you set out, you're doing something that's judged by your content expert peers as being right, good, excellent. And that is a huge move forward when you're just trying to get a grant. So it feels like, well, I'm writing a grant, how can I possibly spend time writing papers? Well, you have to, the paper will help you get the grant directly.
So you really have to make a plan. So, I'll plan, like some of my Fridays I'm working on papers. Most of my Fridays I was working on a grant. And then I also mix it up too. One thing that's really, really helpful is doing like writing retreats with friends and colleagues who also need to be productive. And so we'll just get together at a conference room here, or at a coffee shop, or any place, and just motivate each other to stay focused and to continue to write.
So outside of writing grants or papers, is there anything else that you're doing here to help advance or increase your network, or other than just conferences that you feel like have really helped you get to where you are?
Yeah, so part of being faculty too, you also have to do service. And so I really try to tailor my service around things that I'm passionate about. So one of my big service commitments is we have a board of, a multidisciplinary board of aging for the University of Colorado. So I'm a board member on that committee. So I get to talk about, where we're failing our older adults in terms of parking. There's not enough parking here, and kind of make recommendations that way. So I'm also part of the Chancellor's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. Health equity is really important to me. So it's nice to have a venue where I have the Chancellor's ear to kind of push some agenda items forward. So doing that service, I highly recommend making sure it's aligned with your goals and that you're not just doing service to check the box for promotion.
True. There's a bottomless pit of ways to give time for free.
Yeah.
So, do it, line it up with your research as much as you can, for sure.
Speaking of time management, what has been your biggest struggle so far in research when it comes to writing grants and managing your time? Has there ever been a time where you think it's too much for you, or there's just a moment where you look back and you're like, wow, I really should have done that differently?
Yeah.
I can think of several.
Sounds like yes.
Always getting it provides a lifetime of development. There's always a new opportunity to do better.
I'm sure Anne can relate to this. When you get your PhD, you are just so excited because you did it and you just want to go take on the world. And then you get hired as faculty and people are excited because you're new. And so you get asked to do everything. So I actually got into a situation which Anne actually helped me manage, where I was like, ooh, yes, 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 yes. And next thing I know, I'm overcommitted and I don't have time to do my own research, which was the big problem. And so you need a good mentor like Anne to help you, say no, because the temptation is to say yes to everything. And again, only picking projects in those areas that I'm most passionate about, my older adults, health equity, and shared decision making. If it's outside of that, then it's an automatic no. If it's inside of that, then it's a conversation with my mentors like, should I do this? And so I think it's definitely a trap for new faculty members to get overcommitted very easy. And so you kind of have to manage your own calendar. There's lots of meetings. So, and a way to manage that is making sure that you're staying vigilant to the things you're really passionate about, and then carving out that protected time to do your own work. Because a mentor I had said, you're going to go up for promotion and tenure, and all you've done is worked on other people's grants. You have to carve out that space for your own work and not feel bad about doing it. not feeling bad about saying no. It's no, not right now, not no for forever.
It might be no for forever.
It might be no for forever.
But generally, it's just, you don't have to say forever.
Yeah.
It's just not at this time.
Yeah.
Right. If there were two of me.
Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah. And yet, right. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Have you ever written a grant where you thought it was, or the outcome was not what you expected?
Yes.
Right now?
Like every single grant I've ever worked on in my career.
Okay.
It's never what you expected. I always tell people, if I work on a grant that goes exactly to plan and I get exactly the data that I think, I'm just going to retire. Because, I've made it at that point.
Right. That you got the mountaintop. Yeah. Right.
But for me, that's part of the fun of research, is dealing with those things and figuring out how to navigate around the different challenges that come up, different recruiting issues that come up, whatever it is.
So there's a lot of freedom within?
I mean, I wouldn't say there's a lot of freedom, but you have to make a plan to pivot if you need to.
Well, I think the way I think about the freedom thing, I actually agree in the sense that with research careers, you can remake your entire job with each big grant you get, right? Because that's how you spend your day. That's your day job. That grant is paying your salary for that chunk of time. So actually, you can stay at the same institution. I've been here for 23 years, and I've had so many totally different jobs because the research that took up most of my cares and concerns were like wildly different teams, different outcomes, different ways of doing things, like big databases, or every so often I forget how bad I am at qualitative research. I'll do a qual study and then I don't think it was that bad. Was it that bad? And then I go, oh my gosh, this is why I don't do this. But you get to change it up with what you get funded. And so in that regard, it's free and it's highly accountable, right? Because you have promised a scope of work in a time, and like you might mess it up, but then you're not getting another one. So I think it's like high stakes, but high reward.
I think you made a very good point too. Like you, as a PI, as a principal investigator, as someone with a terminal degree, a doctorate of some sort, you kind of get to pick and choose what you want to do, which is one of the main reasons why I went on to get a doctorate, because I wanted to pick the projects that I worked on instead of just working on whatever my lab manager told me to work on. And so you do have that flexibility and freedom in academics. Like, so if you want to go work on a cancer project and you're a health econ person, then you can, if you can find your collaborators.
Right. I like that.
So it sounds like the goal is always to become the PI, or you've become the PI, which is great. But looking at the other side of it, I've grown up watching lots of hard work and lots of grants get submitted, not always smiles after. And so considering how low success rates can be for submitting a grant, what keeps you motivated?
That's why you have to have the passion. I'm a Colorado native. I grew up here. I love the community here. And that's why I sit at this table, is so that I can be a voice for them on this campus. And that's what keeps me going. Being a researcher is hard. Writing grants is hard. You have to have a really, really thick skin, because you get a lot of rejection and a lot of critiques that you just have to deal with and keep going forward with. But if I didn't have that passion for wanting to make my community better, then it's not worth it. But that's just for me. I have that passion and that desire.
I agree with that. Because ultimately, sometimes there is an opportunity to get funding on a project you're not that excited about, but you want to be funded to do research for your job. And sometimes that's just, a reality of life. It's like you got to pay your bills.
Right.
Okay, so fine. But all else equal, you would always choose the thing you care about, because it's going to be hard no matter what. And when it's just you, and you're up early or you're up late or you're working on the weekend.
And you get a reviewer who tells you your work is trash.
Right.
It's not.
You have to, the motivation has to be in you, because it keeps you going.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's real easy to get discouraged if you're already a little lukewarm about something and you're questioning whether you should do it anyway, and then a reviewer questions whether you should do it. You go, that's what I was thinking. Or not really, but it's just, it feels like, you know, like you're wasting your time somehow, or I don't know. I think the bumps in the road hurt a little more when you're not as like, I know what I'm doing is right. Yeah. I'm totally dedicated to this. Yes. Like at some point, somebody's going to get on board with me.
Yeah. I had a mentor when I was, before I became a PI, who once told me that you just have to accept the fact that 20 to 30% of your job is just going to be stuff that you don't want to do. Mm-hmm. But you just have to do it so that you can do those things you're passionate about.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think that's the goal. As you progress in your career, each time you have a chance to get rid of something that you don't want to do, or you are so-so, you pick a new project that you love, and then you get far enough along. I mean, I've been so lucky. I mean, it's been years now where literally every single project I loved. Now, I didn't love every minute of working on those projects. I didn't love every person that was part of those projects, but each thing was amazing and it was my choice. And if I needed to make room for something new, I was actually giving up something that I really liked. But to me, I mean, then you never work a day in your life.
Right.
So that's the goal.
And I think that's a really important point to harken back to something Joe asked earlier too. Like when you're an early stage investigator, find a mentor that has the career that you want and then ask them how they got there. So like what you just said was so great. Like you got here by doing some things that you didn't want to do, but you had to do. And then as you progressed in your career, you were able to really tailor it to what you want. So me, I see that. I want your career. So Anne, how did you get there? Like find those mentors.
Right. And people do love to tell you their journeys and stuff.
And it's also so interesting how different careers can be to both get to a grant. Because it sounds like you went a completely non-traditional route and you sounded like you went more traditionally. But it sounds like there's a lot of different paths to become a PI or just get on a grant or get funded.
Yes. Yes. Indeed. And just like you are reflecting, I mean, Channing, you were working in research not as the PI for a long time before you decided, I'm going to go get my degree and be the PI. Joe, you're working on a team in team science, deciding if you want to be a PI or do something else. You know, there's so many ways to be part of the research enterprise, and each way gives you a little bit of experience where you're like, this part, amazing, this is for me, this part, not for me. How could I grow more in this way and get more of the good stuff? And that is the story for human development, for organizational growth, is you don't have to worry about doing away with the bad. You just drive towards more of the good. And suddenly you find yourself like, oh my gosh, it's all.
And find your collaborators who can do that stuff. Like, I will go do your qualitative stuff for you. That is my thing. But I need you to look at my data sets and crunch those numbers. That is not my thing.
That would be so much better for me.
So you find those collaborators that you can complement each other too.
Right. I will also say, just back to the rejection, I also think it's good for you. It's good for your soul to be rejected regularly, you know, because then you're growing, right? If you go lift weights, Joe, I asked Joe to help me lift weights, you know, you need to like have some difficulty, some struggling to let that muscle get stronger. And in the same way, if you're not getting rejected, I don't think you're submitting enough. If you're not getting papers sent back, you're probably not shooting high enough. You know, like this is most people who like research are natural learners, and you want to always know more, be better. You're trying to figure out a new way. And I think that's like a lifetime. That's like a way of being. There's not a point where you're like, well, answer that question. No other unanswered questions here, right? Everything is always like, that's a 20-year research agenda.
Yeah.
And you go.
But I think you're absolutely right. Rejection is part of this job. it's part of this journey, and you can choose to deal with it in different ways. I always write when I get a rejection for a grant or for a paper, I always write the review that I really want to say. And then I put that in the trash.
All right,
And
throw it
then
away.
Yeah, and then you respond appropriately. And one thing that I've really learned, I just submitted the Career Development Award that Anne mentioned earlier, the K. One thing that I've really learned along that journey is that feedback is not a bad thing. Like sometimes I would send my grant out to my mentors and it would come back and there would be like 2 words that didn't have a comment. And it can seem overwhelming and harsh, but really it's not. What that means is that your mentors are invested in you and they want you to have the best possible grant. So view that feedback as a blessing.
Right.
And a way to learn and a way to grow.
I totally agree. I don't know if you've ever had a situation, I mean, this is common sometimes in sports, where you have a coach or if you have coached or you've mentored a student or you have an employee, some of them are messing up and you think to yourself, let them go. I'm not gonna, they're not worth, it sounds terrible to say, but it's just really not worth my effort to do more to develop them. And there's some who you're like, I know you can do better. I know you want to do better. My gift to you is I will help you do better. It's a beautiful gift. And so if somebody's giving you feedback and criticism, generally speaking, it will be for your benefit. And it is a wonderful gift. All you say is thank you so much.
And saying thank you so much is a skill that you learn over time.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it doesn't sting. I can still remember a few harsh words from, actually, they're kind of funny. There's actually a website. It's called Stuff Reviewers Say, if you know this. And people send in comments out of manuscript reviews or grant reviews that is outrageous. And you can laugh about it.
Right.
But I still remember a few harsh things from reviews like 30 years ago. No, I'm not bitter, but it's amusing, and you try to be the change, right? When I review for people, I'm always generous, kind. There's no need to beat people up. This is hard enough.
Right.
And most reviewers are volunteering. You don't get paid to review. And they're doing it because they love research and they want good research to happen and they want good people to do it. So, if you can get into that gratitude zone, you can overlook some of the awkwardness and, try to do better.
When you look back at, while you're here, it's easy to say, oh, like have a thick skin, rejection is just a part of this job. But while you're in it, and you may feel stuck and you may feel like this was your chance, this was your thing, and you don't get it. When you look back, what are your top 3 or top couple of things that you think were the most helpful things that you did on your journey to become a PI or get a grant funded?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for starters, you really, and I know I keep saying this, but you really need to have that mentor that can tell you, it's okay. It's okay. Go be upset, go whine, go cry, go scream, go yell, go do whatever it is you need to do. It's okay. And then you just have to give yourself that space to be in that funk. Don't stay there, but be in that funk. And then you just got to move on. You just have to move on and keep moving forward and resubmit and revise and resubmit and revise and resubmit. I have the paper for my dissertation got rejected 7 times before it got published. 7.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's so many stories like that, right? Whether it's papers or grants. Yeah. And what we know is first submissions almost never get funded. Period. End of story. Mm-hmm. The success rate on first submission is minuscule, like 10%. It's bad. Which means logically, you must get back on that horse. You gotta get back in there, because if you're getting funded, it's almost always on a resubmission. And that's why, one of the greatest gifts you can give early career researchers is how to keep going when the inevitable rejection comes. Because it always comes. That's the game. But so many people never come back. Mm-hmm. They either say, oh, that was a terrible idea, or I'm a terrible researcher, or the whole thing isn't going to work. What about this new idea? So they're in this horrible Groundhog Day of first submission, get rejected, first submission, get rejected.
And that's the trap.
That is such a trap, and it won't end well.
Yeah, because then
gotta
you go
keep
for
going.
promotion and then you haven't done anything because you keep doing these first submissions that don't get funded.
Right. That's when you got to double down with the help of your mentor. There are sometimes, you have to be coachable, so to speak. There's a fine line between being responsive to reviewers and saying, yeah, you were right. You uncovered something that I didn't see. Jerks. But fine. Okay. And how much do you hold your ground? You're like, and I'm going to explain why this is the way. And so there's a dance there where you want to accept feedback and hold on.
I always start every one of my reviews with, thank you for your thoughtful and encouraging comment or something like that.
Right. I know. And I always start with, we agree. Even if you
Yes.
subsequently say, except I'm not going to do what you said. But we agree. Good point, reviewer. Thank you. We agree that is a fair thing to raise.
However.
And then, I don't even say however, just say what you did. And and therefore, we're taking this step, which happens to be double down, But yeah, it's true. I think the older you get, the more times you've been rejected, the more you share. And it's not shameful, it's bonding. So often when people like Channing are writing their first big career development award and they get rejected, it's so painful. It's highly painful. And what we try to do is celebrate. I say, congratulations. You have joined the club. You're not a real researcher until you've had a grant rejected without review.
Oh man.
Right?
Oh man.
And
I'm preparing for that.
Right.
I've been preparing for that because,
I know.
like you said, 8% get funded on the first time. So I'm preparing already mentally to rewrite the grant that I just submitted.
Right.
Because you just have to.
Right. So, and you can hear, Joe, like when Channing and I, there's a mindset in this area where it's fun, it's competitive, it's hard, but you really care about it, and it's not for everybody. True.
It's not.
But if it is for you, it is the greatest gig around.